Happy morning, dear children of grade 7. Welcome back to our chemistry class. As in the previous class, we learned about this our chapters number 7, air and atmosphere. The various components present in the air, such as oxygen, carbon dioxide. How can we prove the amount of CO2 present in the air? How can we prove it? The amount of oxygen is present in the air. That various activities, experiment based on we discussed in the previous class. Now the further part of the lesson. Today's class we are here to discuss about this process, nitrogen fixation. What is written here? Nitrogen fixation. What you know, nitrogen is also one of the major constituent of air. As we know that air is a mixture of several gases, carbon dioxide, water vapors, oxygen, other inert gases. In addition to all these, this also an essential component, major constituent of the air. We know that this is present in the huge quantity in the air, nitrogen. So here what we have to discuss, nitrogen fixation. What is nitrogen fixation? How can we define this term? The phenomenon in which the free atmospheric nitrogen is further converted into its compounds. The compounds of nitrogen. What are the compounds of nitrogen? Nitrates and nitrites. These are the further compounds of nitrogen. If the nitrogen further it has splitted into these two, nitrates and nitrites, then it can be utilized by plant body and human being. Human being cannot use, we say that this is present in a huge quantity. The air has nitrogen in more quantity, but the amount of nitrogen present in the air cannot be utilized in a direct form, either by the plants or a human being. We too need, we know protein is a essential bodybuilding component, one of the major nutrient required for our bodybuilding, growth of the body. In addition to this, there are several other tasks played by protein in our body. So molecules of protein, the amino acids which they are composed with, they all need nitrogen for the formation of a long chain. So this nitrogen, plants and human beings, the required nitrogen, they cannot obtain directly, which is present in the free form. So it has to be, the nitrogen present in the air has to be converted into simpler form, the compounds of nitrogen, nitrate and nitrites. Then the plants and human being can utilize it further. So nitrogen fixation is a process in which the nitrogen, atmospheric nitrogen get converts into nitrate and nitrites. And this work, this job, this role is performed by few bacteria, and those bacteria which are responsible for fixing the nitrogen, atmospheric nitrogen, we call them nitrogen fixing bacteria. What we call nitrogen fixing bacteria. Example, Rhizobium and Azotobacter. What are these? These are the two bacteria. Which bacteria? What kind of bacteria they are? Rhizobium and Azotobacter. They are nitrogen fixing bacteria. Where these bacteria will be? These nitrogen fixing bacteria, Rhizobium and Azotobacter, they live on the, you see here. What is shown here? This is one plant. What kind of plant it is? This is a leguminous plant. Which plant? Leguminous plant. You can take groundnut, pea, gram, beans. These are the few examples of leguminous plants. The plants which convert at free atmospheric nitrogen into compounds of nitrogen, nitrates and nitrites. Those plants will have, this is a leguminous plant. These are the roots of these leguminous plants. On the root nodules of these leguminous plants, a few bacteria will be. The bacteria which are present on these root nodules of this leguminous plant, these bacteria we call nitrogen fixing bacteria, the Rhizobium or Azotobacter. So these Rhizobium and Azotobacter bacteria present on these root nodules of the leguminous plant, what they do, they absorb the nitrogen directly from the air and further they convert it into compounds of nitrogen, nitrates and nitrites. Then this work who is performing? The bacteria which are living on the root nodules of leguminous plant. We are calling them nitrogen fixing bacteria, Rhizobium and Aryabhatta. These bacteria, what they are doing? They absorb the amount of free nitrogen present in the atmosphere and they further convert them into compounds of nitrogen, nitrates and nitrites. Then that once the amount of free nitrogen, complex nitrogen, further it splits into its compound like nitrates and nitrite, it can be further utilized by plants. And from plant we obtain them. We depend on plants for our food. We obtain green leaf vegetables we eat. We take fruits. In that form, we further consume the required essential nitrogen. So nitrogen fixation is a very good example. Here you can see the leguminous plant is here. This is one organism you can take. The leguminous plant is one living organism, and the other you can take the bacteria which are living on the root nodules of this leguminous plant. They are the second organism. So here association of how many organisms we are able to see? Two organisms. One is what we have? One is leguminous plant. What is the other organism we have? Bacteria. Which bacteria? Nitrogen fixing bacteria. So these two. One is leguminous plant, the other is bacteria. Which bacteria? Nitrogen fixing bacteria such as Rhizobium and Aryabhatta. These bacteria are the number two organism. The number one host is leguminous plant. So they both are living. The leguminous plant need nitrogen. Who is converting that nitrogen into nitrate? The bacteria. In turn, the bacteria, whatever the food they need, nutrients. For the nutrients to obtain, those bacteria which are present on the root nodules of this leguminous plant, they are depending on plant body. So there is a symbiotic association. This process in a group in which two organisms are dependent upon each other. That association we call as symbiotic association. What we call? What do you mean by symbiosis? A group, a association in which two organisms live and they help each other. They help each other. Here also we can see a symbiotic association. What kind of symbiotic association we see here? Bacteria are helping the plant to convert the nitrogen. In turn, the plant is giving required food to the bacteria. So here there is a involvement of association of two organisms. One organism is leguminous plant, other organisms are nitrogen fixing bacteria. They are helping each other. So what is nitrogen fixation? You are clear, I hope. The process of conversion of nitrogen into nitrates and nitrite by the nitrogen fixing bacteria is called nitrogen fixation. Why nitrogen has to be converted? Because the amount of free nitrogen present in the air cannot be utilized by the plants or animals. Therefore, it has to be splitted further into its compounds such as nitrate and nitrites. So this is an example of nitrogen fixation. We can otherwise call as symbiotic association or mixotropic nutrition also. What is mixotropic nutrition? An association in which two organisms lives together. So this we can take example as biological fixation. There is another one, fixation of nitrogen is there, that is non-biological. This is biological fixation of nitrogen. For that biological fixation we have taken nitrogen fixation by the bacteria like Rhizobium and Aryabhatta. Non-biological fixation of nitrogen is, lightning. During that, the amount of oxygen and nitrogen present in the atmosphere react and forms further oxides of nitrogen. That we can take non-biological fixation of nitrogen. That further we'll discuss in our next class, non-biological fixation of nitrogen. For today, this is enough. Example of nitrogen fixation, biological fixation of nitrogen. So here in this way the nitrogen fixation takes place, and further that nitrogen is utilized by various plants and animals. So we'll leave here, and further part of this chapter will be continued in our next class. Thank you.